This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
Mall of America's mystery cards are back, and we're bringing them to you all summer long. Come grab yours at KFAN events throughout the summer or wherever you see our KFAN Street Team. And make sure to redeem them at Mall of America for fun prizes and big discounts. See full list of events, KFAN.com, keyword calendar.
Top 5 at 5 in about an hour, and Kessler is scheduled to join us in studio at about 5:30 this evening. Much to discuss, as always, on the political front with him as well. Gerald Posner, kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline now to explore a number of subjects, as we tend to do when he joins us. Welcome back, sir. How have you been?
Good, Dan. How are you?
We're doing very well, thank you.
Are you running a fever?
I don't think so. Should I be?
I thought I saw one of your replies on X. It must have been in response to something else.
Yes, no, it was. We have a lot of humidity in Minnesota right now, very high dew point, and there was a story in my former newspaper, the Star Tribune, laying out the fact that part of the humidity is being attributed to corn sweat, which is a term I think I'd heard of before, but we kind of had fun with that yesterday, and ever since I just can't get it out of my head. Are you familiar with corn sweat? Have you ever done an investigative article on it?
I've never heard of it before.
Yeah.
They may be onto something up there. I'll have to check that out.
Well, in Miami,
we have a high dew point.
Yeah, I was going to say Miami, the dew point, I'm guessing, has less to do with corn sweat than other issues about geographically where you are, the ocean, currents, et cetera, that sort of thing?
Yeah, putting us a little closer to the equator always does it.
That might have something to do with it for sure. All right. Number of directions I want to go in, but I want to start with a tweet from you that got my attention. This was actually from 7/2. As an attorney, I'm appalled. Brian Kohberger brutally slaughtered 4 students, and neither the prosecution nor the judge forced a full accounting. No statement, no motive, no answers. Justice isn't just a sentence. It's truth for the families, and they were denied it. As you know, today, indeed, the sentencing, well, there were 2 big parts of what took place today in court. Victim statements, there were some very, very powerful ones, in fact, your wife, I think, retweeted just how powerful one of them in particular was. And the other part was the sentencing. So help for the lay people of those of us out here who didn't study the law. I mean, we assume there's always these sorts of deals that take place. But in this case, you're not the only one. There are a lot of people, including, I think, some surviving family members of at least 2 of the families, that have not been happy at all with the way this has played out. Translate it to us. Explain exactly why this case played out the way it did.
Yeah, I didn't know, obviously. I never know where you're going to start. I'm just glad you mentioned Kohberger, because otherwise we could miss it. And you're right, it was back in July when they first made the plea deal with him, the prosecutors, that I was so enraged. And what I was upset by as an attorney is that, people say all the time, well, you're never going to find out why, because he doesn't have to give you motive. You don't have to prove motive in a criminal trial. And if they had gone to trial and gotten a death penalty, they may have never found out the motive. True. But what I wanted, and I think some of the family members wanted, was for the prosecutor to say, if you want a deal that avoids the death penalty, you're going to have to do what we call as lawyers an allocution. It's done often. And that is where the defendant, in order to get the deal, is asked a series of very pointed questions by the judge and has to disclose exactly what happened and when and how it was done. It's often very tough to listen to in the case of serial murderers or spree killers because the facts are gruesome, but you get it out, you find out what happened at the very least, even if you don't necessarily get the why. And I didn't want him to be able to avoid that with just a simple, I'm guilty. The prosecutors, for whatever reason, they didn't insist on it. And once they didn't insist on it, the judge could have done it, but it was unlikely, and then the judge did not do it that day. And people said, well, maybe it'll happen in the sentencing. It never happens at the sentencing, whether he makes a statement or not, he didn't. And you're right. I mean, the witness statements, witness impact statements were incredibly at times moving and that today, but it's just maddening that we allowed this to go forward and that the prosecutors didn't realize that they had all the leverage. They could have gotten him on the record to tell it how it happened, and in some ways answered some of the questions we may never now know.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I don't know how closely you followed the case, so I may be asking you a question that you can't know the answer to. But what would possess the prosecution to go down the road that it did here and not attempt to? Now, again, I guess you could say, well, what answers are you really going to get ultimately? But there didn't even seem to be an effort, as you said, to try. And this was, on so many levels, such a horrendous case. There's never going to be quote-unquote closure. It's a stupid cliche that really doesn't mean anything. But there is, as you say, power here in to at least give yourselves a chance to get to glean something out of this story. And out of respect, as I said, for the victims and for the families, it's stunning to me that wasn't the strategy implemented here.
It's really terrible. And the only thing that I can imagine is that the prosecutors, for whatever reason, maybe we'll get this out one day. Maybe it will come out. We'll find it through documents or through somebody who worked on the case who will then disclose it. That they didn't realize the defense said if the defense is playing a tough process and negotiating hard, they'll say, okay, our client's willing to go ahead and plea, but there's going to be no allocution, does not want to do that. And if you're the prosecutor and want to wrap it up, maybe you give into that. Look, I heard from lawyers after I put that tweet up, lawyers kept saying to me, that's how every plea goes down. That's just not true. I mean, the template for serial killers was Gary Ridgway, the so-called Green River killer.
Right.
He told the court how many women he killed. He had a hard time keeping them straight, but as part of his plea to avoid the death penalty, Dan, he gave one of the most detailed allocutions ever. And it was at times terrible and horrible, but his details actually helped the police locate the remains of some of the missing victims. He didn't help them, but his details that he gave then. Now, there are no missing victims in the case of Kohberger. I get that. But there is a reason to get that type of detailed confession where you admit guilt and what happened. And it's been done in the past. There were examples of how to do it, and it just wasn't done here. Very frustrating.
You also, in fact, a piece of yours just dropped earlier today via Skeptic, and you kind of, I think, characterize it quite nicely, what happens when viral mistrust meets congressional power. So some of the themes you amplify in this piece, you and I have talked about a lot over the years, and even more recently as it pertains to some of the, the JFK files that have been dumped and have been examined pretty closely and interpreted quite differently depending on who's doing the interpreting. What was your goal in this particular piece? Where were you trying to take the conversation?
In this piece, I guess never write a piece from the point of frustration. I guess my frustration is that for years, the many people who have looked at the JFK case think that there had to be evidence of the real conspiracy was going to be found if we could only get to the file of this former CIA agent, a guy called George Joannides, who was running these anti-Castro Cubans out of Miami. He was the guy who was running Operation Oswald. He was the guy who had the contacts with Oswald. That would sort of disclose it all. Then I was part of a group that asked for that publicly 22 years ago. The CIA is to be damned and criticized for holding on to these Cold War files far longer than they should. They finally release it. Good. Credit to Representative Luna and the Oversight Committee for embarrassing them enough that they release it. Comes out. I look at it, I read through it. It's not a very big file. Nothing in there. No Operation Oswald, no Oswald, nothing else. The part that's frustrating is that the media, I use that as a big term, but in this case, Axios, and then later the Washington Post, they just do lazy journalism. They went ahead and did articles that sort of bought the spin that was being put out by people who said, well, we don't know. Maybe it really does say something. And they brought up this anti-Castro Cuban who's now 83 years old, who's changed his story after all these years. And they say, that's the real truth. And Representative Luna, who I give credit to for getting the files out there, is still saying, I think there are multiple shooters in Oswald to Patsy. And let me tell you, if the file doesn't establish an Operation Oswald, it certainly doesn't talk about shooters at Dealey Plaza or anything else. So she just goes out ahead of her skis too much. And it seems to be, we're in an era, we've talked about this before, where I'm on Twitter, I put up things that are fast and easily digestible. People digest something and they take the 240 characters and that becomes the story for them. And it's very hard to bring it back to what I call a more normal, this is what really happened type of story.
Well, you've laid out part of why it's hard for me to have that much respect for Representative Luna's approach. Because again, you could say, well, she's rattled some cages and some stuff has gotten released and maybe otherwise wouldn't have. But most of us, I think, try to come at this with, okay, I want to re-examine this story. I can live with that from somebody in a position of authority, but she fixed it from the beginning, right? It wasn't like, all right, look, I have my suspicions, I have my doubts, I have my concerns. So what I'm going to try to do is reopen some hearings where we examine these things. We talk to a number of people who are all across the board regarding these issues. But that's not how she has characterized it from the beginning, as you say. As she's pretty much said, Oswald to Patsy, multiple shooters involved. And it's almost as if, all right, I'm only going to be interested in information that comes my way or testimony that comes my way that will confirm what I've already concluded, rather than let's follow the story and see where it goes.
Yeah, and so, I think, look, a lot of people live in an echo chamber, and they get the information only that reinforces what they've already come to believe. That may not be so bad if you're just a person who happens to be looking at a subject and you're only reading stories or listening to news or watching TikTok that tells you what you already think's happened on a case. But when you're a politician with some influence, and she has influence, she's, new to Congress, but she has influence inside with the MAGA part of the party, and when running an oversight committee, there's some responsibility, I think, that comes with that. And that combination of it's coming from a political figure who's running the oversight committee combined with the lazy reporting in places like the Washington Post and that, no wonder the JFK conspiracy theories just go from one to the next to the next. And what I think is frustrating in the case with her is even at the hearings when she had witnesses, she only called those people from Oliver Stone and others who, sort of didn't call anybody else. She didn't have to call me. She could have called a historian. She could have called anybody who could have given her a balance of that, but she wasn't interested in that. And I point out in this article in Skeptic the things that she said in the beginning that sort of were demonstrably wrong about the case, but she hasn't backed off. She sort of doubled down on that as she goes along. So there's no rule that as a politician you have to get it right, but I do think that this type of conspiracy view, it makes sense to me that if you think that everything the secret government has done, the deep state has done, is against the interests of the American people, that you probably believe in your heart and soul that they also assassinated an American president back in 1963. It just goes to show you that when you cross the deep state, if you cross them too much, they'll kill you. And that's sort of held as an article of faith by people that I talk to, which is rather remarkable considering that, evidence just doesn't matter.
Without evidence.
That has to be the case.
Yeah, that's exactly it, without evidence. When's the last time you've spoken with Oliver Stone?
Never. As a matter of fact, after my book came out, Case Closed, I kept trying to talk to him. I tried to talk to him before, he wasn't interested at that time. Then after Case Closed came out, I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to, debate him, whatever else he never has. I remember I published a long article in the New York Times Magazine about new files after Case Closed came out a couple of years later, about new files in New Orleans from the Garrison investigation, the DA who had looked into the case back in the late 60s. And he wrote a letter to the New York Times afterwards that said, I wish that organizations like the New York Times, I had access that Gerald Posner has to the New York Times, because I'd like to say, you're not looking at the real facts. There's a big conspiracy here. And I thought, isn't that amazing? This famous Hollywood director who has a $100 million hit in his what I call false history, and JFK is complaining that the New York Times doesn't give him as much space as they gave me, which to him probably is a sign of the conspiracy. There you go.
Has he ever acknowledged any of your work, to your knowledge?
I know he has denigrated any number of times, and that I would be shocked, Dan, if I was not in his view of the world, because he has, that sort of very conspiratorial view of the deep state and everything else, that I must be not an agent for the deep state, but I must be one of those people that they just pull out of the woodwork, and go ahead and decide to close it. I mean, I've had what I call the Oliver Stone type views of, history come after me to say, and I never even thought about this. They say, you did a book afterwards on 9/11 in which you think that 19 hijackers hijacked 3 planes, crashed 2 into the towers and 1 into the Pentagon. Yeah, I do think that, even though I think Saudi Arabia also knew about it at the highest levels and that our government covered that up. But to the truthers who think that the buildings were imploded, that obviously is covering up for the government. I think that, Tim McVeigh blew up the Murrah building. I wrote a small booklet about it to people who think that McVeigh was set up. I must be telling the official story. So I'm always amazed at how people view history.
Gerald Posner, a best-selling author and investigative reporter, kind enough to join us this afternoon on the Fan. You had made note of the fact that, speaking of, file dump, there was a huge one related out of nowhere. And you can tell me whether this was a shock or not, or surprise, on MLK files. And you've characterized them, at least early, I think, when you were first looking at them, as it's kind of disastrous in that a lot of them are difficult to read. They didn't do a very good job of preparing this kind of release. What do we know about these files? What might we glean from them? And is it pretty challenging to even figure out what's on some of these pages?
So it's slow. So when I say it's disastrous, look, eventually we'll get through all the files. There are 250,000. All of us who are looking at them they're PDFs. We take them, right. We make them OCR, searchable. We find out what's in them. It's just that, everybody wants an answer tomorrow. Like, what's in them? I get it. Right. I'm making my way through. And they aren't really, it wasn't a surprise. They were released at just the timing of it. We didn't know when, because in January, Trump had signed, remember, an executive order that said, get out all the files on MLK, JFK, everything else. So JFK was first. Now, MLK, maybe we'll get some RFK soon. We just didn't know when they were coming. If you believe in conspiracies, you'll think the government released them now because they wanted to take people's eyes off of Epstein, but I don't think so. I just think this is when they had them ready. And there's a bundle of FBI documents. I mean, the material I'm looking for, there are still full-page redactions, documents I'm coming across. So the entire page is still blocked out. And they're not just addresses for or names of informants or that, but I think that they are summaries, often of the FBI agents who were doing the illegal wiretaps and phone surveillance and videos on Martin Luther King that had been ordered by J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI. They were spying on King. They thought he was a communist sympathizer. They wanted to get dirt on him, and they did get salacious things on him, from visiting brothels to maybe children out of wedlock to everything else. So and some of that's been reported on in the past. One of the reasons the King family, I think, was reticent about all these files being out, they thought everything was going to be unsealed and it would include all of that. It has nothing to do with the assassination. I don't think it should be unsealed. And you do see sections in here as you come across them when they're talking about some surveillance in a 2-year period when RFK had approved it. Bobby Kennedy was then Attorney General, and before Hoover stopped it, and they're sort of shocked about, and it goes off and the whole page is blacked out.
Is there an open question, as someone who's obviously written extensively, including a book on the MLK assassination, are there open questions that you still have that you're eager to find out whether some of those might be dealt with in this particular stuff that's just got released.
Yeah, what I'm interested in is to find out if there was more information that they came up with afterwards in following the money. And what I mean by that is, although I'm convinced James Earl Ray was the assassin, I've always thought that he was motivated by the lure of a payday, maybe up to $50,000 put out by this racist lawyer from Missouri, that his brothers, who were two ex-cons as well, Ray's brothers, had picked up word of this because one of them out of prison had been in a prison where that was being passed around, and that Ray met with his brothers in December of 67, only like 4 months before he kills King, and picked up the word about that bounty. To the Rays, who were in prison, out of prison all their life, and James Earl Ray had escaped from a big state prison in 67, was still on the run at that time. This was like hitting lottery. And King was somebody, they grew up in a poor white family that was a 100-year history of criminals in the family. The only people lower on the totem pole were blacks in Alton, Illinois, where they grew up. So killing a preacher, Martin Luther King, even if he was the most famous one in the country, for a payday of $50,000 was something I think they couldn't pass up. I'd like to know if the FBI, to the extent they picked up any hints of that. I know the people to look for and everything else, so I'm looking for that in there.
Where's the Epstein story going? Can you tell?
Well, I mean, I spent a few months last year looking on a tip that I got that made me think it was possible there was foul play in his death. And I literally spent like 2 months chasing down these stories and interviewing people. I didn't see the videos, but I interviewed people around the prison and everything else. And I came to the conclusion it was suicide, and it was no stories. I didn't publish anything at the time. So I'm not surprised at the no foul play suicide story, but the idea that there's no client list, if there's a client list, it's in Ghislaine Maxwell's head. She has it. She knows what it is. So the question is, can you get it from that? And are you going to get it? Is she going to give it up? If it was a client list that was so terrible that people think that they killed Epstein, she'd be dead as well.
Right.
But she's not. So I think that there's more mileage to this story, and the more I know how this works in terms of politics and files and release of information, once people want it out and you hold on to it for whatever reason, they think you're holding on to it for the most nefarious reasons. So a judge today in Florida said he can't release the grand jury testimony that Trump had wanted released. Well, people think behind the scenes the Trump administration must be saying, we're just going to ask for it, but be sure you say no. There's going to be a lot of banging of the drum until more files start to come out.
Let me ask you a follow-up from a media standpoint regarding CNN had some stories last night that they presented. The big breaking news, our K-File has investigated this, and this is what we have uncovered. And at the end of the day, I found it very dissatisfying and not worthy of the attention they gave it. And basically, they seem to find some previously apparently not unreported video and still shots that put Epstein and Trump at similar social events. And every once in a while, I like you, I say, well, you got to follow this story, and there's still a lot of open questions for sure, but there are days where I think there's too much of an effort to say, aha, we got it. And it's like, I'm not sure what you got there. To me, if you're gonna create a link, it's got to be a lot deeper than they're both at events, which would indicate that they did maybe socialize or that they were closer that way. And I shake my head because I think it ends up hurting the cause when it's presented as some kind of a major breakthrough in the case. But I'm curious to get your view on that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I thought the same thing. I saw the reporting, and I thought to myself, wow, that's where we're at now. It's at the stage of how many people you could run a list. You'll be busy for the next 2 weeks running a list of famous people around Epstein, from Bill Gates to Dershowitz. Go down the list. And does that mean that there's something nefarious or terrible there? If that's the inference, and that was certainly the inference with the CNN piece. But CNN got what they needed, which is that I understand that Trump was on a phone call on Tuesday. It lasted a half a minute or something.
Yes, right.
With a CNN reporter before he hung up, and that's gold for CNN.
Right.
If you're looking for ratings as a news organization and you break the story and then you get the president of the United States in a fury to hang up on a reporter, that must add to the feeling that the president must be hiding something to your viewers. And so I thought that the story was very thin.
Yeah, I think that doesn't mean there's not there, but it's like it's the famous moment in, the movie version of All the President's Men, where Bradley, they're proud about the piece they have to advance the story. Bradley sits down to read it, and he gets about 3 pages in, and he looks up and he says, "You haven't got it. You haven't got it." It's like brilliant. And that doesn't mean it's not there, as was the case, obviously, in Watergate. It just means if you don't do a better job of presenting, to me, I think that's where you start losing people, and they start thinking, well, you're just in this to nail them, whether you have smoking gun information or not. One last thought. I've been all over the waterfront here, and this is apropos of nothing, but I am, again, curious to get your review on it. We spent some time on this subject last week. Stephen Colbert gets canceled, and I think he's going to finish the year, but they're not renewing, and they're doing away with the franchise as well. And I'm always nervous about the possibility that part of what dictated that decision was a pressure, because obviously that program was very anti-Trump. I am not ever going to endorse the notion of shutting down any program, regardless of the positions they're taking. But as someone who grew up on late night and is not offended by late night occasionally getting political, I found some of the effort to turn Colbert into a martyr a little bit disingenuous, because to me, part of the issue for years on that show is, unlike, let's say, a Bill Maher, I think Colbert would never surprise you. You can be left or right of center, but surprise me every once in a while, rather than just being so down the line that I got bored with it simply because I didn't trust it, because it had become that ideological. Where are you on all that issue, those issues?
No. So I had stopped watching Colbert because it was too preachy to me on just one line. And it was no longer funny. It wasn't entertaining. And the interesting thing about that is, in the end, you remember Jim Acosta, who was CNN? He really was very tough on Trump and everything else, and then he left CNN. He's got a Substack now. He's got like 200,000 subscribers. There's a market for it. Nobody's canceling him. He's making some money. And he is just he's one note. You look at Acosta Substack and that's it. But he's out there. In Colbert, there's also a question of finances. I understand this. So, you're $100 million a year, and if you're not making money at a certain point, you might keep something on, but I understand that, there are financial considerations as well. I thought that the rush to make him immediately into somebody who, was a hero about this, was just a bit too much and too quick, because people who were doing that just hadn't watched Colbert in a long time.
I agree with you totally. By the way, speaking of Maher, I don't know if I've asked you this before. Have you ever been invited onto his HBO show? Because you should. Yeah,
as a matter of fact, I have been. I did when I had my Perot book out. Believe it or not, I did it in '96, and I did him again in God's Bankers, and I was supposed to go on him for Pharma, but damn COVID made his show go on hiatus.
Yeah, well, but you should still be on anyway, because again, you can speak about any of the stuff that he's going to get into, and I think again it fits perfectly what he intends to do on that show, and that's sort of why I have. And I don't always agree with Maher. I'm sure you don't either.
Yeah, no, but same thing.
But I'll say, I think he'll surprise. He's not afraid to push back on his own constituency and say, wait a minute, what are you talking about here? He's got that fearlessness to him. I know some people are disappointed in him because they think he's turned rightward. Right, I think I think actually what's happened is the parties have changed. And I think he's not all that different. But to me, he has a little bit of that sense of irony that you're looking for, whether you're left or right, if you're going to do that kind of show. And I just don't think Colbert had any of it. If he ever did, he lost it.
No. No, you're absolutely right. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, the question I have, I don't know the answer to, we'll see, is are they really going to keep Colbert on till May? Because it's just going to be every night.
That's true.
Bashing the network. and I'm not sure how long that plays.
I appreciate the time, the extended time as always, man, and we'll be in touch. Thanks, Gerald. And Skeptic is the latest piece, right? That's where the folks can get what we were talking about much earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Dan.
Be good.
Thanks.
Gerald Posner, who has joined us for many years on a number of different subjects, and we covered a lot of ground today on a number of different stories that I wanted to at least break ground on with him. Reaction via the Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line at 64686. Kessler in about 1 hour, top 5 at 5 in about a half hour. Maybe we'll give you a little bit of a Twins update. Day game in Los Angeles, California. Is this the rubber game of the series? I assume it is. If it's a day game today, this must be getaway day. Rubber game for your Twins, who won last night after losing the opener. And we'll get back to some Vikings training camp conversation as well. Day one is today.
Gatorade Zero, the #1 proven electrolyte blend, made with zero sugar. Designed to hydrate better than water so you can lose more sweat and push more limits. Gatorade Zero. Is it in you?
We'll be out there
Minneapolis, get ready. Music legend Paul McCartney is bringing his Got Back tour to U.S. Bank Stadium October 17th. Tickets on sale now. One night, one icon. Don't miss it. Full details available. KFAN.com, keyword calendar.
Been saving a series of texts covering a number of subjects from the start of the show. And the start of the show, if you missed it, and pity if you did, is all about we being your WWWDWF leader. Meaning, what would we do without football? And a number of folks have offered up their opinion. And when I say football, I really mean pro football. If it just didn't exist in the George Bailey way in the film It's a Wonderful Life. Never started. So what would fill the gap? What would we be paying attention to from a sports standpoint? Or would we be less sports oriented? Well, that's one of the subjects covered. There have been several others over the course of the program, including more corn sweat talk. I asked today whether today it was not just muggy, it rained a lot. Can we blame that on the corn sweat? Hey, Dan, the corn sweat evapotranspiration is causing the higher dew point / moisture. We know that already, local storm chaser guy. This moisture is just one of the ingredients in place today that's causing our rain and thunderstorms moving through the area. Key ingredients for thunderstorms are lift, some type of forcing to lift the moist air up like fronts, instability, and moisture. For severe thunderstorms, you need to add one more ingredient, which is shear. Shear is the change in wind speed and or direction with height. That's something you don't want to be in the middle of wind shear when you're on an airplane, especially when you're just taking off and just landing. It can be very dangerous. For tornadic severe storms, you need both speed and directional shear. Thank you for your service. That's local storm chaser guy. In your analogy, life with football is probably more like Pottersville than the wonderful life George was trying to escape. Very cynical view of the game of football and the degree to which it consumes our lives and takes over our lives. But an interesting one, nevertheless. 952 guy writes, if pro football didn't exist, the Vikings trophy case would look exactly the same. Oof. Once again, just like with the wild Lego satire, the truth can be cruel, but it cannot be controversial. How about this one? I'm going to trust his math on it because it's too good to not be accurate, even if it isn't. The NFL averages 17.5 million viewers per game. 17.5 million viewers per game. Each game is about 3 hours. 272 games per year. That's 14.3 billion hours spent watching. That's 1.65 million years. Imagine what humans could do using that time more productively. But would we? Is part of what we need escape? Is that not what professional football for a lot of people represents? So to assume that, well, we could better use our time in other ways, would we though? Or would we view it as, well, no, that's what we need. We got the other stuff that's more important and we know it and we try to concentrate on that when we can, but we got to get away from that from time to time. And football, pro football for a lot of people allows us to do exactly that. Dan, like you, I was never a Black Sabbath or Ozzy Osbourne fan. This is a callback to yesterday's Ode to a Dead Guy with John Bream. A friend of mine sent me a soulful cover of a Sabbath song a singer named Charles Bradley sang. Now, this is some Sabbath I can get into. Hope you dig it. That's Matt from Minneapolis. Well, here's what I can tell you. The Black Sabbath song that Charles Bradley has done is called Changes. And I will add, Charles Bradley was once in this studio as a guest on the Bumper to Bumper show. He was in town. He was an older fellow who kind of like had a meteoric rise, very bluesy, rhythm and blues, hard to explain, funk and soul combo platter that got everybody's, well, I should say everybody, but a lot of people's attention in the music world as someone who kind of came out of nowhere and came from very difficult circumstances. We had him in studio. And it wasn't the easiest interview because he was kind of hard to talk to. And the sad news is he died September 23, 2017, at the age of 69 years old. I don't know what that's from, but it's interesting he brings that person up because I've not heard Charles Bradley's version of that song. I bet you I would like it. And beyond that, as I said, he was actually a guest of this very program. Let's do this. Let's get caught up. We need to pause here because we went long with Gerald Posner. We still got some stuff to get to, Vikings related, and more. What would we do without professional football? More of those texts to get to before we prepare for the top 5 at 5. Maybe we'll give you a Twins update even ahead of the top 5 at 5. They're taking on the Dodgers this afternoon at Chavez.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
If you want to chime in what's happening to your favorite KFAN shows, you can make your voice heard on the Brad, John Bryant KFAN text line. So let us know what you have to say by texting your message to 64686. The 64686 standard text message and data rate supply.
Our TV is under construction here because we're making some big changes to Studio A. But the latest info I have is Twins-Dodgers tied 1-1. Chavez Ravine, bottom 07. I believe the Dodgers have one on. Last I saw, one on, nobody out. And so it's been a pitcher's duel, shockingly involving Chris Paddock, who went 6 innings, allowed only 1 earned run and 4 hits. We won the game last night with, I think we had like 16 walks. You know that you're too young to know that the one of the most famous messages delivered at the old Metrodome when the Twins played there was "Walks will haunt." And they haunted the L.A. Dodgers in last night's game for sure. That and errors, including a 3-base, I think bases clearing error, if I'm not mistaken. So we took advantage of the fact that we faced some wild Dodgers pitching. We were patient enough to accept the walks that we were given, and then we held on later in that game. So it's the rubber game today. By the way, for the record, Ohtani, the only Dodgers run is an Ohtani dong, his 37th of the season, but that's the only run the Dodgers have to this point. In fact, it looks like they are threatening. I got runners at first and second for the Dodgers and nobody out. I heard a bit of sound during the iHeart Sports update during one of our breaks indicating that the Twins are asking for pretty much any of their live bullpen arms in trade. They want 2 top 100 prospects. And I don't know who's our starter who Joe Ryan has pitched very well. And in the case of all these pitchers, we've got a lot of contract control forever. I got to tell you, I don't just want top 100 prospects because we all know how that goes. I want a major leaguer. Is that too much to ask? And if it is too much to ask, I'm not going to trade him. That's fine. I'll just deal with it, and I'll hope that maybe we can make some changes with new ownership, more money being spent, and maybe we can actually build around some of these pieces in which we have still very advantageous contract situations, at least for now. I'm not interested in top 100 prospects alone. That does absolutely nothing for me at this point. As someone who has said, you might have to be better off getting the most you can, but you still have it within your power to determine what you're going to be willing to accept. And if you have some viable commodities, especially when it comes to, a starting pitcher or closer or bullpen, I think you ask for the moon. They can say no, but then you can make another decision and perhaps go another direction as well. Kessler will be about 5:30 or so. WWWDWF, there would be no interactive Ice Bowl exhibit. That's also true. Think about it. I mean, you're a football guy. Well, you're a soccer guy, though. So somebody tried to tell me they think rugby would be huge here because it's at least somewhat physical. And that's what we like about pro football, that soccer can't deliver that same level of physicality. I don't know, though. Rugby, I'm not sure.
I mean, is college football still on the board?
Well, yeah, I did kind of put that on the board, which is why here, like I said, once upon a time, the Gophers were the thing, and maybe they would never have stopped being the thing. And then maybe there would have been far greater willingness to spend the money on coaches and resources to where there wouldn't be as big a drop-off because that was all we had from a football standpoint. I don't know. I mean, I think we'll all agree pro football is on a different level than even college football, as big as college football is in this country.
But no Ice Bowl exhibit. Does that mean no theater as well? Where does it end? I think that,
that's the problem. Who knows where it ends? I'm looking for it again here. The no cap on the jar. That was the big theme from PJ today. He's basically saying, look, get greedy. Get delusional, I think is the term he used. And he said, I'm going to have to explain that to the media. I mean, delusional in the sense of no cap on the jar. Why can't we end up in the college football playoff? Indiana University did a year ago. Made no sense. Now, it didn't go very well for them, but they got there. So, brick by brick has been replaced by no cap. Is it on the jar? Yeah, I guess it'd be on the jar, not in the jar, right? No cap on the jar. PJ Fleck. Might be able to find some sound on that. I don't know. You have to look. I had one other. This is from Eric in Uptown. I actually saw Charles Bradley at First Avenue due to the bump interviews. Love everything, anything bluesy. Saw him 2 more times, including in Europe, as he was padding through the same city at the same time. He toured there a lot, and they loved him there. Yeah, he had a very unique voice, very interesting, and a great backstory as well. Unfortunately, as I said, he has passed away. I don't know if we're going to get into this subject with Kessie at 5:30. We talked a bunch of different subjects with Gerald Posner, and we got a number of people who are a little bit, I guess you could say, unhappy with me as it pertains to let me see if I can get it, the Stephen Colbert cancellation. I'm not going to lie to you, man. The whole Stephen Colbert as martyr does nothing for me. This is a guy who's going to be fine. He's got all the money in the world. He's going to continue. I'm sure he'll land somewhere. He'll get somewhere as well. But let's face it, a lot of the people who are upset about it are, like he is, committed, devoted Jets. And that's legal. I'm not saying that's against the law, but that's why you're bothered. And I'm never going to subscribe to, as much as I've ripped him over the years, this isn't new for me. I've never said, though, he should be canceled. Never said I want him. I want to shut him up. I'm not a big believer in that. I think people know I'm pretty consistent on that. So if in the end we find out that's what happened here, nobody wins in that environment because that can be used against you when the other party is in power. So that's not what we're talking about here. But this notion that he's exposed how the hypocrisy of the network. Alert the media on how networks work and how they make decisions when it comes to making money. Lindbergh baby, are we really serious here? And again, he decided to do the show the way he decided to do the show. Did nothing for me. It was, as Posner said, it became so preachy, it became just a series of lectures. And I even can live with that as a guy who's been known to lecture from time to time. I just want him every once in a while to surprise us or mix it up where he says, oh, I didn't see him coming after the Dems on that one. And he almost never did. And when he did, it was extremely mild because he decided the cause was too great. And the dirty little secret to me, of late night TV is you can have an edge, I think. You can even have political sensibility. But if you forget that a lot of it is making people smile or making people laugh, then eventually, even though, again, he was the highest rated of the remaining shows. None of them were doing what they were, in terms of finances, what they had once done. He continued to be the highest rated one. But to me, that's why a lot of people just said, enough. We get it. We get it. We understand. But I just shake my head and I say, so the idea that he's some kind of a martyr and what's happening, is he okay? And what's happened to him, please spare me. Top 5 will include
all the NFL talkers from day one of training camp.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?